Welcome back, brave souls. Tonight's chilling tale comes from Nicole, a new subscriber from Chicago. Nicole's harrowing experience began with a seemingly innocuous Craigslist ad that spiraled into a nightmare of terror. What started as a search for a vintage item turned into a fight for survival against an unseen, malevolent force. Prepare yourself for a gripping, spine-chilling journey into the dark side of the online world. Buckle up as we dive into the world of classified horrors. Dear Mr. Phantom Knight, my name is Nicole, and I've lived through an experience so chilling that it has haunted me ever since. I feel compelled to share it with you, hoping it will serve as a stark warning to others who might be tempted to delve into the darker corners of the internet. This is my story of how a simple Craigslist ad led me into a nightmare that almost cost me my sanity and my life. It all began on a dreary autumn evening in Chicago. The city was wrapped in a heavy fog, and the air was crisp with the chill of the coming winter. I was in search of a vintage typewriter for my writing projects. Having exhausted traditional avenues, I decided to check Craigslist, hoping to find a gem among the listings. As I scrolled through the ads, I stumbled upon a listing that caught my eye. It was titled "Rare Vintage Typewriter, Free to Good Home," and included a photograph of a beautiful, old-fashioned typewriter with intricate engravings. The ad was unusual not only because of the item's rarity, but also because of the offer. Free. I was intrigued, but cautious. The contact information was a simple email address. I hesitated for a moment, but my curiosity got the better of me. I composed a polite email expressing my interest and asked if the typewriter was still available. To my surprise, I received an immediate response. The email was brief and straightforward. It read, "Hello, I'm glad you're interested in the typewriter. It's still available. Please come by tonight to pick it up. The address is 425 W Elm Street, Apt 3B. The building is old, but the typewriter is in good condition. I'll leave it outside the apartment door for you. Regards, M." There was something odd about the email, but I brushed it off. I needed that typewriter, and it was a rare opportunity. I decided to go pick it up. The address was in a part of town I wasn't familiar with. As I drove to the location, the fog thickened, and the streets seemed to grow eerily quiet. The apartment building was old and weathered, with peeling paint and cracked windows. It had an unsettling, abandoned look despite the few lights flickering inside. I parked my car and made my way to the entrance. The building's lobby was dimly lit and smelled of mildew. The air was damp and musty, adding to the feeling of unease. I took the elevator to the third floor, where apartment 3B was located. The elevator creaked and groaned, and the flickering light made the journey feel even more unnerving. When I arrived at the apartment door, I found the typewriter exactly as described. It was a beautiful machine, with a glossy finish and ornate detailing. I felt a surge of excitement as I prepared to take it home. Just as I was about to leave, I noticed a peculiar object lying next to the typewriter, a small weathered journal. It was bound in leather and looked old, as if it had been there for decades. My curiosity got the better of me, and I picked up the journal. Its cover was embossed with a strange symbol, a crescent moon intertwined with an eye. I flipped through the pages, but they were filled with illegible scribbles and disturbing drawings. One drawing depicted a figure with hollow eyes and a gaping mouth, surrounded by dark, swirling shadows. It sent a shiver down my spine, but I dismissed it as the ramblings of a disturbed mind. I decided to take the journal along with the typewriter, thinking it might be a valuable piece of history. I placed both items in my car and drove home, feeling an uneasy sense of foreboding. That night, I placed the typewriter and journal in my study, eager to explore them further. As I examined the typewriter, I noticed a hidden compartment beneath the keys. Inside, there was a small rusted key and a handwritten note. The note read, "For those who seek the truth, beware the shadows that linger in the past." I felt a chill run down my spine as I realized that there was more to this typewriter than met the eye. I decided to investigate further, hoping to uncover the mysteries hidden within the journal. Over the next few days, I became obsessed with the journal. I spent hours trying to decipher its contents, but the writing remained indecipherable. The disturbing drawings haunted my dreams, and I began to experience strange occurrences around the house. Objects moving on their own, flickering lights, and an unexplainable chill in the air. One night, as I was working late, I heard a faint tapping sound coming from the study. The sound was rhythmic and persistent, like someone gently knocking on a door. I dismissed it as the house settling or perhaps the wind, but the tapping grew louder and more insistent. It was as if something or someone was trying to get my attention. I went to the study to investigate, but there was no one there. The room was eerily quiet, and the typewriter sat silently on the desk. I noticed that the journal was now open to a new page, one I had not seen before. The page was filled with dark, swirling ink that seemed to writhe and shift as I looked at it. At the center of the page was a drawing of a figure that looked disturbingly similar to the one from the earlier drawings. The figure's eyes were hollow, and its mouth was open in a silent scream. The ink seemed to bleed into the surrounding pages, creating an unsettling effect. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me, and I quickly closed the journal, trying to shake off the feeling of dread that had settled over me. That night, as I tried to sleep, I heard the tapping sound again, this time coming from inside the house. It was accompanied by a low, guttural growl that seemed to come from the walls themselves. I could feel the air growing colder, and the oppressive darkness of the house seemed to press in on me from all sides. I tried to ignore the noises and focus on getting some rest, but the sounds only grew louder and more frantic. It felt as if the house itself were alive and trying to communicate with me. The tapping became a constant rhythm, punctuated by occasional eerie whispers that I couldn't quite make out. The next morning, I decided to reach out to the seller to inquire about the typewriter and the journal. I sent an email to the address provided, but received no response. I tried calling the phone number listed in the email, but it was disconnected. My attempts to locate the seller led nowhere, and I began to feel increasingly isolated and unnerved. As the days passed, the strange occurrences in the house escalated. Shadows moved on their own, and the temperature dropped inexplicably in certain rooms. I began to experience vivid nightmares of being chased by shadowy figures, and I would wake up in a cold sweat, feeling as if something was lurking just out of sight. One evening, while examining the journal again, I noticed something new. The ink on the pages seemed to shift and change, forming new symbols and drawings that I hadn't seen before. The drawings depicted scenes of dark rituals and twisted figures, their eyes glowing with malevolent intent. The symbols seemed to pulse with an eerie light, and I felt a sense of impending doom as I tried to decipher their meaning. Desperate for answers, I turned to online forums and occult experts, hoping to find someone who could help me understand the journal's contents. Many of the experts I contacted were intrigued but cautious, warning me that the journal might be connected to dark forces or ancient rituals. They advised me to handle it with care and to avoid attempting any rituals or summoning practices. Despite their warnings, my curiosity drove me to explore the journal further. I began to experiment with the symbols and drawings, trying to decipher their meaning and unlock the secrets they held. My obsession grew, and I spent hours in the study, poring over the journal and attempting to unravel its mysteries. One night, as I was working late, I heard the tapping sound again, this time accompanied by a deep, resonant voice that seemed to come from the shadows. The voice whispered in a language I couldn't understand, its tone filled with anger and despair. The room grew colder, and the shadows seemed to writhe and twist, taking on ominous shapes. I felt a sudden, overwhelming pressure on my chest, as if something was trying to suffocate me. The room's lights flickered violently, casting erratic shadows that danced along the walls. The whispers grew louder, merging into a cacophony of anguished cries and guttural growls. Panicked, I grabbed the journal and the typewriter, determined to get rid of them. I decided to drive to the outskirts of the city and bury them in a remote location, hoping to put an end to the torment that had plagued me. I loaded the items into my car and drove through the foggy streets, feeling an unsettling presence following me. I arrived at a secluded spot in the woods, far from the city's lights. The fog was even thicker here, and the darkness seemed to envelop everything. I dug a hole and placed the journal and typewriter in it, my hands trembling with a mixture of relief and dread. As I covered the hole, the fog seemed to close in around me, thickening and growing more oppressive. The shadows of the trees stretched long and sinister in the dim light of my flashlight. I felt a cold breeze brush past me, carrying with it a whisper that sent chills down my spine. As I turned to leave, the fog seemed to swirl and pulse as though it had a life of its own. The whispering grew louder, more urgent. It sounded like a multitude of voices, each one pleading or screaming in a language I couldn't understand. My heart raced, and I hurried to my car, feeling an overwhelming sense of being watched. I drove home with my hands gripping the steering wheel tightly, trying to ignore the feeling of eyes boring into the back of my head. The fog seemed to follow me, clinging to the car windows and distorting the view of the road. When I finally reached my apartment, I was relieved to be back in the safety of my home. But the relief was short-lived. The moment I entered my apartment, I knew something was terribly wrong. The temperature inside was frigid, and a cold draft seemed to blow through the rooms. The lights flickered sporadically, casting eerie shadows that danced across the walls. I could hear the tapping sound again, now coming from multiple places within the apartment. I tried to ignore it, telling myself that it was just the settling of the building or the wind. But the tapping grew more insistent, and the whispers from the woods seemed to have followed me. They echoed through the apartment, merging with the tapping to create a cacophony of terror. Desperate for answers, I turned to the journal again, hoping to find some clue as to what I had unleashed. The pages had changed once more. The ink had darkened, and now seemed to throb with a malevolent energy. New symbols appeared, and the drawings had become more detailed, depicting horrific scenes of torment and suffering. One drawing stood out, a depiction of a shadowy figure surrounded by a circle of flames, with eyes that seemed to follow me wherever I looked. The figure's mouth was open in a silent scream, and the flames seemed to reach out from the page, threatening to consume everything in their path. As I stared at the drawing, the temperature in the room dropped sharply. I could see my breath misting in the air, and the whispers grew louder, more frantic. I felt a presence behind me, and when I turned, I saw a shadowy figure standing in the corner of the room. Its form was indistinct, shifting and flickering like a bad signal on an old television. I froze, my blood turning to ice. The figure seemed to be watching me, its hollow eyes filled with an unspoken rage. The room's lights flickered violently, and the shadows twisted into grotesque shapes. I tried to move, but my legs felt like lead. The figure stepped closer, and the whispers turned into a chorus of anguished wails. In a burst of panic, I grabbed the journal and the typewriter and threw them into the fireplace. I lit the fire, hoping that burning the items would rid me of the curse. The flames roared to life, casting flickering shadows on the walls. The heat of the fire was intense, but the shadows seemed to dance around it, as if trying to protect the items from being consumed. As the journal and typewriter burned, the whispers grew louder and more chaotic. The room was filled with a cacophony of screams and growls, and the shadowy figure seemed to writhe in the flames, its form becoming more distorted and anguished. I watched in horror as the flames turned a deep, unnatural blue, and the shadows seemed to merge with the fire, creating an otherworldly glow. Suddenly, the temperature in the room shot up, and the flames erupted in a burst of black smoke. The smoke coiled around me, choking and suffocating. I stumbled back, gasping for air, and the room seemed to collapse into darkness. When I could finally breathe again, I looked around, and the shadowy figure was gone. The room was eerily quiet, and the temperature had returned to normal. The fire had burned itself out, leaving only the charred remains of the journal and typewriter. Exhausted and shaken, I knew I had to leave the apartment. I packed a few belongings and left, deciding to stay with a friend until I could figure out what to do next. The apartment has remained empty ever since, and I haven't been able to shake the feeling that something still lingers there. In the months that followed, I tried to piece together the events, but I could never fully understand what happened. I know now that some things are better left undiscovered, and some mysteries are best left buried. The Craigslist ad that seemed so innocuous led me into a world of terror that I can hardly describe. So here's my warning to anyone who might be tempted to explore the darker corners of the internet. Be careful what you seek, for some things are better left untouched. Sometimes the price of curiosity is far too high. Thank you for listening to my story. I hope it serves as a cautionary tale for others. And remember, sometimes the most terrifying things are the ones we can't fully understand. Until next time, stay curious and stay cautious. If you enjoyed Nicole's terrifying tale and want to hear more stories that will keep you up at night, make sure to subscribe to Mr. Phantom Night. Share your own chilling experiences with us, and join our growing community of thrill seekers. Until next time, stay brave and stay safe.